I saw him through the narrow pane of glass, a boy my age, sweat on his forehead, gun in his hand. But it was his eyes that froze me. Hollow, empty, and yet inside them, a flicker like a plea, please stop me. The next second the door shook with bullets, desks splintered, and blood ran across the floor. Everyone screamed. And I realized I was staring straight at the person who might end my life. Good evening. It's me again, and tonight I'm going to read you a letter unlike any other. A letter from the survivor. A young man who has stared death in the face 3 times. In classrooms, in a midnight store, and under an open sky where music turned into gunfire. Each time, he walked away alive. Each time, he left surrounded by silence, blood, and bodies. You may recognize the shadows of these tragedies. You've seen them on the news, whispered their names in fear. But the person who wrote this letter didn't just watch. He lived them. And now, he's writing to us. So as you listen tonight, remember. Sometimes lightning doesn't just strike twice. Sometimes it follows you. Sometimes it chooses you. Hit the like button, subscribe, and don't go anywhere. Because this story is not about luck. It's about the mark death leaves when it misses. Now let's begin. People call me lucky, blessed, charmed. They say I must have a guardian who walks a step ahead, clearing the path right before I step into the dark. They don't feel what I feel, the cool pressure between my shoulder blades, as if a crosshair lives there. I don't move through life. Life takes aim at me, and I keep hearing the click before the shot. The first time was April of my freshman year. I was 19. Campus had just shaken winter from its coat. Trees along the quad were pinning on new green, and the air smelled like wet earth and overheated coffee. People studied on the grass as if knowledge could tan you. Frisbees ticked through the sky. Someone laughed too loudly and apologized to no one. I remember thinking this was the beginning of everything. The world was unfolding like a map and I was one pin on it. I had no idea how fast a map can burn. My morning class met in the old engineering building, a red brick block that kept its windows and regrets from the 70s. Hallways hummed with the low electricity of students who hadn't yet learned to be tired of themselves. I floated with them, notebook under my arm, mind half on formulas and half on nothing at all. I chose a seat by the window. I always liked an exit you could see. The professor started in, chalk clicking against the board in steady beats. The heater under the sill pinged to itself like a small engine. The room smelled like floor wax paper, the ghost of last night's printer jam. Someone unwrapped a mint with the painstaking care of a bomb tech. It was all so ordinary that the first gunshot didn't make sense. It didn't belong to this world. It cracked down the corridor, and every surface in the room answered with a thin metallic cry. The professor stopped. The chalk slipped from his fingers and wrote one last mark on the slate by itself. A pause, and then the second shot, closer, angrier, pulled a scream out of the hallway like thread from a wound. Everything fragmented. Desks skidded. Phones lit. Breath turned loud. "Lock the door," the professor said too calmly, because people say calm things when they are already falling. Someone shoved a table against the handle. Someone else whispered, "Is this a drill?" as if the word could rename the moment into something survivable. The handle rattled, a curious animal sniffing our fear. I stood and saw him through the narrow rectangle of wired glass. He could have been any of us, young, pale from fluorescent light, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat and something colder. His mouth was slack, the face of a boy who got lost and never taught himself how to ask for help. But the eyes, God, the eyes were wrong. Not furious. Not blank. Hollow, like a well no one had drawn from in years. In that darkness, something flickered, small and painful, like a candle lit in a house on fire. A plea. It looked like please. It looked like stop me. It looked like two things fighting for the same body and neither willing to lose. Our eyes met. The room thinned until it was just a pane between us, the knowledge that he had come to do something you can't undo, and the stupid, stubborn human fact that he was my age. We stared a heartbeat too long, and the heartbeat became a countdown. The gun lifted. The first shot punched the door, wood splitting along old scars. The second hit the hinge, the lock leapt in its bed. A third found the thin panel, throwing splinters across the room like sharp rain. The girl at the aisle, the one with the careful mint, jerked and fell into her chair, red running across the desk in lines that would smear if I touched them. Someone screamed my name. Someone else sobbed don't on a loop. The professor leaned his weight into the table, arms shaking, wedding band bright on a trembling hand. Window, he said, eyes never leaving the door. If you can. Paint stuck to my palms as I fought the latch. The frame grieved as it lifted. Cold air struck my face, fresh grass and a metallic tang. The drop was 2 stories, high enough to hurt, not high enough to change my mind. Behind me, the door shuddered. A burst of shots hammered the hallway, more voices tore. Another desk clattered down as a barricade, and the whole room bent with the weight of people wanting to live. I hooked an arm under the mint girl's elbow. Up, I said, and her body heard me even if her mind could not. We moved like a strange creature with 4 legs and one shared terror. Her lip was cut, blood gleamed too bright against her teeth. We got her onto the sill. A bullet took a bite out of the door. The professor's shoulder jumped, once, and he folded to his knees, still holding the table with both hands as if he could be the hinge of the world. For a beat I looked back through the window in the door again. He had stepped into the threshold, and the classroom shrank around him the way rooms do in bad dreams. Our eyes met for the second time. In the hollow, the flicker again, mercy, maybe, or memory of mercy. The barrel drifted toward me as if it were being pulled by a tide. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I nodded. Maybe my face begged. Maybe I was one more mirror for a boy who couldn't bear to see himself. I went out the window. The sill scraped my ribs. Glass nipped my palm and stitched a thin, burning thread. The ground came up hard and without hurry, the way the ground always does. Pain snapped along my right leg before the rest of me caught up. For a moment there was no sound but the ocean inside my head. Then the building breathed out gunfire again, and the world returned in shards, lawn, sky, the sharp scent of juniper, a shoe without a foot, a phone buzzing itself hoarse in the grass. People followed. Some jumped and rolled, got up and ran. Some fell and didn't get up. A boy slid down the brick and left a red comma that didn't finish the sentence. Another student hung in the window as the frame spat glass around him. Hands inside tried to pull him back, hands outside tried to pull him through, and for a second he was made of rope. I dragged myself across the lawn on elbows and knees, a crawl that felt like learning to be a body from the beginning. A girl sat on the grass with her back against a tree, staring at the building with a face that had forgotten which muscles you used to have expressions. I saw a sleeve gone dark, a hole where fabric used to be, a hand trying to keep blood in as if blood could be reasoned with. I ripped my belt off and cinched it above the wound on a stranger's arm. Too tight? I asked, and he nodded and shook his head and nodded like a broken pendulum. You're okay, I lied, and he said okay, back as if the word could be true if we used it enough. Sirens braided in from every direction. Somewhere a fire alarm finally decided to be brave and screamed its opinion. Officers moved like tall, careful trees, their voices low, steady, trained to be the opposite of chaos. Hands visible, one said. Keep moving. Another asked what we had seen. We answered in shards, door, shots, window, blood, eyes. Someone put a blanket around my shoulders that felt like paper pretending to be warmth. Someone pressed a packet of gauze into my cut hand and told me to hold on to it like a promise. Time was a bad idea for the rest of the day. Minutes stretched and snapped. Hours fell through each other like wet pages. They gathered us in the gym and counted, and the counting became its own prayer. Phones lit faces blue while parents called names into the void. I typed, "I'm okay." with a thumb that wouldn't stop shaking, and watched the message spin into nowhere before it finally landed. A boy at the end of the bleachers made a sound I had never heard before, and hope fell out of his hands onto the floor. Across the court, a girl retched up coffee and nothing else. By afternoon, the news had torn our campus out of our hands and fed it to the country. Numbers marched across the bottom of screens. Photos appeared, yearbooks smiles still ignorant, IDs taken before anyone knew what an ID might have to do. People said tragic, and senseless, and unimaginable, until the words rubbed thin. Vectors were drawn. Maps lit up. There were statements, then flowers, then candles, then a vigil, then a silence that had edges you could cut yourself on. That night I tried to sleep and failed in every direction. When I closed my eyes, I saw the door, the splintering wood, the mint. I saw the professor's band catch a last line of light. Most of all, I saw his face, the boy in the hall, and the flicker in the hollow. You can spend your life trying to decide whether someone is monster or patient, executioner or prisoner. Sometimes the answer is yes. I learned the names of the dead the way you learn a prayer you didn't ask for. They recited them at a microphone, and each one changed the room. The number of injured rose and dipped and rose again until the counting felt like an insult. I washed my hands until the cuts stung clean and still found a thin rust smell that wasn't mine. Guilt sat on my chest like an animal with a long tail. Every time I pushed it off, it circled back and lay down heavier. People called me lucky. They hugged too tight and said they were grateful, as if gratitude could bargain with whatever had missed me. I nodded because nodding is what you give the living, and because explaining the mark between my shoulders would make me sound ungrateful to life itself. Morning came anyway. The quad was the same place, and not the same place. Crows argued in the trees as if the world were still capable of small, stupid arguments. Maintenance crews swept glass into piles that caught the sun and tried to look like jewels. The engineering building stood with bandaged windows. Students walked by with the careful steps of people learning to be seen again. When I finally made myself past the classroom, I looked at the door and thought of wells and candles and the way a plea can live inside an act that erases pleas. I didn't know then that I would wake months later with my heart sprinting because I dreamed of a narrow pane and a pair of eyes that wanted two opposite things. I didn't know that every April afterward would taste like metal for a week. I didn't know this was just the beginning of the pattern that would draw me into other rooms, other crowds, other exits. I only knew this: I had been measured and spared, and that is not the same as being safe. People say I'm lucky. I say I am marked. The first time taught me the difference. The next times would teach me the cost. 5 years after that April morning, I thought the curse had gone dormant. I told myself nightmares don't have sequels. I worked nights at a supermarket on the edge of town, a place that smelled of bleach and cardboard, where the loudest sound was the soft beep of a scanner and the tired sigh of doors sliding open. It was a job made of routine: stack the shelves, count the change, lock up at 11. Nothing dangerous lives under fluorescent lights, I thought. It was late, close to closing. The store was nearly empty. A young cashier tapped nervously on his register, watching the clock. A woman with a sleeping toddler in her cart waited in line, rocking it gently so the wheels made tiny squeaks. At the self-checkout, an old man with coupons studied the screen like it was a puzzle that might unlock eternity. In the back, I was stocking cans into a cooler, the cold biting my fingers. The night felt calm. Then the doors opened, and calm died. 2 men walked in. Not shoppers, shadows in hoodies, faces half hidden, gloves already on. The first was tall, jerky, his movements wired with caffeine and panic. The second was shorter, steadier, his stillness more frightening than rage. Both had guns. The taller one barked it out before the air could breathe. Hands up. Nobody moves. Phones down. The world shrank. The woman clutched her cart. The toddler stirred, whimpered, then fell quiet again as if the child's body knew silence was survival. The coupon man froze with his papers in hand. The cashier raised both arms, his lips shaping prayers without sound. From the cooler I watched through the glass. The aisle stretched like a funnel with me at the end of it. Their eyes swept the store, searching for motion, for resistance. When the shorter man's gaze found me, the mark on my back flared cold again. Register. Open it! The tall one snapped, shoving his gun toward the cashier. The boy fumbled, his hands too slick with sweat to press the keys. The drawer gave its electronic groan and slid open with its sad little ding. Bills crumpled into the robber's hands. Coins clattered to the floor and rolled away like panicked insects. Now! The tall one shouted. It's on a timer, the cashier stammered. His voice broke. His whole body looked ready to collapse. The coupon man, the grandfather, took a small step forward. His hands were raised, shaking, but his voice tried for calm. Please, he said, let the boy be. There's no need. The gunshot cut the sentence in half. The old man folded, knees buckling, his coupons scattering like snow across the tile. He hit the ground wrong, and red spread in the grout between the squares. The woman screamed. The toddler woke and wailed, a sound too small and too enormous at once. The mother yanked the cart back with animal strength, crashing into a display of paper towels. The tall gunman cursed and swung his weapon wildly, the barrel shaking like a hand that couldn't decide what to point at. The shorter man, he looked different. His gun wavered. His eyes, the only part of his face I could see, weren't angry. They were hollow, empty the way caves are empty, but inside, something flickered. A plea, silent and sharp. A struggle, as if two creatures lived inside him and only one wanted to kill. Our eyes locked. It was the same as years ago, in that college hallway. The same void. The same tiny flicker inside it. For a moment, the store fell away, the crying child, the cashier's sobs, the gunpowder sting. It was just me and him, and the quiet question in his eyes, what are you waiting for? The tall one screamed again, spittle on his mask. Do it! Do it now! His voice cracked. He shoved the shorter man's shoulder, dragging him back into the blood. And then the grandfather groaned from the floor. A soft, human sound. The tall gunman snapped and fired again, once, twice, into tile that shattered into white dust. The mother screamed. The cashier ducked under the counter. The baby cried harder, every sob a knife. I don't remember deciding to move. My body just crawled along the aisle, pulling myself on elbows through a smear I didn't want to look at. The cold metal of the shelf pressed against my cheek as I hid behind the end cap. I could hear their shoes on the tile, heavy, angry, wrong. Then silence. And then a whisper. Not from me. From him. Run! I froze. The short one was right beside me now, his gun lowered just a fraction. His eyes met mine again, and the plea was real, undeniable. He said it again, louder this time. Run! I bolted. Past the registers, past the bleeding coupons, past the woman clutching her screaming child. The automatic doors hesitated, confused by panic, then opened with a sigh. The night air slapped me in the face. The parking lot spread wide and dark, dotted with lonely lamps. I dove behind a row of carts and stayed there, body heaving, hands pressed to the cold steel. Inside, chaos. More shouting. More shots. Then sirens, distant at first, growing until they painted the lot in red and blue. Officers spilled inside, weapons raised, voices cutting commands through the air. People staggered out in twos and threes, faces drained of blood, carrying each other like broken furniture. The woman pushed her cart into the night, her baby still crying, both of them drenched in terror. They gathered us by the curb. Thin blankets, shaking hands. Someone pressed gauze into my cut palm, though I couldn't remember how I'd been hurt. They asked what I'd seen, but my words came out in fragments: gun, door, coupons, eyes. The old man was carried out on a stretcher with a sheet drawn up, his coupons still scattered across the linoleum inside. The cashier sat on the curb, his hands bloody from counting survival. The robbers fled. The news later called it botched. 2 dead, 3 wounded. Numbers, like math, could explain horror. Reporters called us survivors. Strangers called us lucky. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt watched. That night, in the shower, I scrubbed my hands raw. Still, I smelled metal. I saw the eyes of the shorter man, the one who whispered run. I didn't know if he spared me out of mercy or because he couldn't pull the trigger one more time. What I did know was that the mark on my back hadn't faded. It had just been waiting. And the second time proved the first wasn't an accident. The pattern was real. And it wasn't finished with me yet. They say lightning won't strike the same place twice. They never say anything about the same body. Years after the supermarket, I stood in a crowd under desert stars, wrapped in music and dust. The stage threw gold across our faces. The air had that late-night warmth that tricks you into thinking the world is kind. We were shoulder to shoulder, hats and denim and plastic cups glowing like small lanterns in our hands. A friend shouted something in my ear and I laughed too hard, grateful for the kind of noise that doesn't mean danger. Across the boulevard, a hotel tower rose like a stack of lit teeth biting the dark. The windows were squares of night and neon, an enormous checkerboard of other people's lives. I remember thinking it looked like a face with too many eyes. Then the popping started. At first, we made it into something friendly. Fireworks, someone said. Crackers. A generator, maybe. The band kept playing and the singer's voice climbed a bright ladder. The pops grew faster, closer together, until they braided into a sound my body remembered before my mind did. The air changed temperature. The music stumbled and fell. People dropped. Not like in movies, no neat choreography, no slow collapse. They crumpled and vanished in the crowd the way a step disappears in sand. A cup exploded in my hand and my brain, idiot that it is, thought ice before it thought glass. A woman screamed and the scream ran through us like electricity. People ducked, surged, froze, exploded in every direction, because terror gives you all the wrong choices at once. Down! Someone shouted. Get down! We flattened. The gravel pressed into my cheek. The smell of beer and hot metal and the strange chemical sweetness of stage smoke turned the air into syrup. A man near me kept saying, "Okay, okay, okay," to himself in a voice that meant the opposite. Another voice, calm and impossible, counted between bursts. Move on the brakes. When it stops, move. That's when I heard it, the pattern. A long, tearing volley like a zipper ripping the sky open, then a pause that felt like a hell breath, then another, higher and meaner. The sound didn't come from the stage. It came from the hotel's black rectangle of windows, from far away and too close. We crawled toward the exit that was not an exit but a fence. People climbed. Metal bent and screamed. I pushed a girl up by her sneakers and she vanished over the top, leaving a tread-shaped bruise on my palm. Someone was stuck. Someone else tore their jeans and didn't notice flesh until they were over and gone. Behind us, the stage lights hit the dust and made a milky galaxy of our panic. A man staggered past holding his arm the way you hold a spilling bowl. I ripped my belt free, again, and cinched it high, the leather singing through the buckle. Breathe, I said. Name? He gave me a first name, and I handed it back to him as if returning something he dropped. The pause ended. We flattened. A cone of gravel hopped in front of my nose. Someone's hat flew, spun, and did not land. We used the pauses like stepping stones. Crawl, freeze, run, drop. A woman in a sundress clutched my wrist and dragged me under a scaffold with a whisper that had the serrated edge of prayer. The scaffold shuddered and shed dust like dandruff. Her calf bloomed red. I wrapped it with a strip torn from my shirt, hands slippery with other people's stories. You're good, I lied. You're good, you're good. She said her kid was at home asleep. She said it twice, as if saying it again could keep it true. The boulevard was a moving animal. We poured across it in waves, tripping over medians, tripping over each other, turning the space between two curbs into a river you could drown in. Tires screamed somewhere, then stopped, then screamed again. The hotel loomed over us, its windows now nothing but black squares. One on a high floor had changed, glass gone, a dark hole cut into the grid, a square mouth exhaling muzzle flash breath we could not quite see but could not stop tasting. I never saw his face. The distance made a kind of mercy of that. But the broken window looked like a hollow eye, and inside it a small, ugly candle burned, bright, then gone, then bright again. And I thought of the hallway years ago, the supermarket aisle, how the worst things are a shape that returns with new names. We fell behind the wall of a service lot. Someone had the correct words and began triage with a voice like a metronome: green, yellow, red, black. Tarps appeared from nowhere. Gloves snapped on hands that had never worn them. Strangers became medics because the night demanded it. I pressed my palms hard against cloth and counted. 1, 2, 3, switch. Talk to me, I said. What's your name? What color is your house? Meaningless anchors. The answers kept a man here who wanted to go somewhere quiet and could not. A burst hit the side of the wall and turned stucco into a chalky cloud. We kept our heads down and our hands busy. The pauses shortened, lengthened, lied. A man in a security jacket yelled directions that were half right and half brave. Another man blessed us with water bottles and a voice that did not shake. Later I realized it shook the whole time and I had learned not to hear it. At some point I realized I was still wearing a wristband from the entrance gate, neon green, the color of a traffic light telling you to go through a red. We moved again, in hunched lines, toward a loading dock where a box truck had its doors yawning like a mouth. People climbed in and lay down among pallets and a forest of shrink wrap. Others crouched behind the wheels and whispered to gods they hadn't visited in a while. I pressed my back to cold metal and felt the familiar target settle into place. As if whoever was up there could see it from that distance. As if the mark had its own gravity that bullets understand. The shooting went on long enough to have chapters. Time explained itself by growing tired. Police swarmed in patterns that looked like choreography from the wrong show. Radios crackled a language meant for people born to hold it. We moved again when someone with a badge told us to, and again when a woman without one told us better directions with the authority of a person who can read the wind. Finally, the pauses stretched into something like quiet. The silence did that thing where it doesn't fit, where it feels counterfeit. Sirens ate the boulevard whole. Ambulances multiplied, red and blue, turning the hotel and the stage and our faces into bruises. The tower's broken window was just a dark tooth now. They corralled us in a parking lot with lines painted for order we could not use. We sat along a curb, the place where survival insists on sitting. Water. My hands shook too much to drink. Names. I texted mine into phones that understood this time and sent it into the world. A woman asked me if I was bleeding and I said, "Not mine," which was a kind of truth I had said before. Hours turned into a rumor of dawn. The desert did its trick and made the air cold enough to hurt. We gave statements and sentences that forgot their ends. The words we used didn't match the pictures we held. Shots from above, I said. Windows. My mouth kept wanting to say eyes. Numbers would come later. They would be so large that hearing them would feel like swallowing glass. News anchors would build scaffolds out of adjectives and still fail to reach the roof of it. People would say, unimaginable, as if imagination were the problem. Candles would melt. Shrines would grow where sidewalks had been. There would be maps, angles, distances, debates, and then the single plain fact that none of this returned anyone. I slept that morning with my shoes still on, face down on a mattress that felt like a dock after storms. When I woke, my ears still held the zipper sound and my ribs ached from being a smaller shape. In the mirror, dust drew constellations across my face that looked like someone else's sky. I turned the shower too hot and scrubbed, but the water had learned new ways to sound like gunfire. People called me lucky again. Maybe they were right. The bullet pattern from the tower found 100 bodies and skipped mine. But I have given up on the math of spared. What I know is this: the open sky is not an exit. A crowd is not a shield. And the target on my back glows brightest when the world looks most like a postcard. The third time taught me that distance changes nothing. You can die eye to eye or from 20 stories away, and the hole in the day is the same size. It taught me how quickly music can become thunder, and thunder can become something else. And it taught me, worst of all, that the mark isn't done measuring me. Because even after the desert, even after the tower and the tarps and the broken window like a hollow eye, I could feel it, the cool circle between my shoulder blades, patient as weather, waiting for the next room, the next aisle, the next sky. That was the letter for tonight. Not 3 different voices, but one man's life, hunted again and again. If you're listening, survivor, don't mistake survival for safety. Don't let the silence fool you. Keep writing, keep remembering, keep telling your story. Because shadows thrive when we pretend they aren't there. And to everyone else, what would you tell him? How do you live when death has already chosen you 3 times? And missed every shot? Is it luck? Fate? Or is it a curse that hasn't finished yet? Tell me in the comments what you believe. Because if it could happen to him, in a classroom, in a store, under the open sky, it could happen anywhere. It could happen to any of us. This was Tell Me What Happened. Stay safe, lock your doors, and keep the lights close. I'll see you in the next story.